And it was so successful that the FDA then went ahead and issued it in a poster form, which was put up in post offices around the country.
I'm swimming in blood now. They've done everything they possibly can to try to humiliate me. They've had me in court many, many times. But do I care about that? I'm not thinking about what they're doing to me. I'm thinking about the 12,000 patients who's under treatment observation here at this clinic. I'm only thinking of one thing: suffering humanity.
But the government did more than just warn the public. Although federal prosecutors couldn't prove the treatment was worthless, they did outlaw it on technicalities like false labeling in interstate commerce.
At one time, we had 17 clinics open across the country. Food and Drug walked in the same day to every one of them and padlocked them. And no way did Harry have the money to fight that in court, state by state.
After losing all his clinics, Harry Hoxsey eventually gave up his 25-year-long fight against the medical establishment. He built a new clinic in Mexico, put Mildred Nelson in charge, and went back to Texas, where he died in 1974. The Mexican clinic has been treating thousands of patients over the years and is still active today under different doctors after Mildred Nelson passed away. But the Hoxsey treatment has never been made available to American patients, and it cannot even be shipped legally into the country. Those who wish to use the Hoxsey treatment must travel each time to Mexico and are allowed to bring back only the amount needed for their personal use. All the diets, the health food principles, and the nutritional concepts that we share today have a single father, Maximilian Gerson. Dr. Gerson was the first to ever suggest that good health depends primarily on a healthy nutrition. Born in Germany in 1881, Max Gerson was inspired by the figure of Ignaz Semmelweis, the Hungarian doctor who discovered that in order to avoid infections in pregnant women, physicians simply needed to wash their hands in a chlorine solution.
Prior to receiving his doctorate as a medical student, Max Gerson suffered from severe and repeated migraine headaches, leaving him essentially unable to function for days. After 2 years of experimenting, Dr. Gerson was able to eliminate his migraines completely by eating only certain raw fruits and vegetables. By 1918, word was spreading about the Gerson migraine diet. But on one occasion, a patient returned with an observation. Not only had the migraine been relieved, but his skin tuberculosis also disappeared. The astounding news spread like wildfire. In April 1924, famous lung specialist Dr. Ferdinand Sauerbruch offered to do a clinical trial with 450 incurable skin tuberculosis patients. At the commencement of the study, Sauerbruch said to Gerson privately that if even one patient showed improvement, he would believe every word of Gerson's treatment. 446 out of 450 patients recovered, over 99%. Dr. Gerson and his wife Gretchen had 3 daughters, Joanna, Gertrude, and the youngest, Charlotte. Of all the children, Charlotte took a special interest in her father's work. By the late 1920s, Dr. Gerson's fame had spread throughout Europe, especially after he cured Dr. Albert Schweitzer's wife, Helena, of pulmonary tuberculosis and Schweitzer's daughter's skin disease. When Dr. Schweitzer was 75 years old, he came to Dr. Gerson with diabetes and was also cured.
The Gerson therapy aims to achieve a complete detoxification of the body through a series of intestinal washes based on organic coffee and a strict diet of raw vegetables and fruits grown in an optimal terrain. Meat is absolutely to be avoided, as explained by Charlotte, Dr. Gerson's 82-year-old daughter.
Because meat in the body, in the digestive process, causes acidity, phosphoric acid. And in this kind of acidity, the body isn't able to function. The body has to maintain homeostasis. It has to maintain a very exact level of alkalinity versus acidity.
Once detoxified, the human body confirms being a wonderful machine, capable of healing itself from any given disease.
Between 1933 and World War II, Gerson and his family fled Nazi persecution, eventually settling in New York. Dr. Gerson's 7 siblings died in the Holocaust. Throughout the 40s, Dr. Gerson's success at his New York clinic stunned the medical community, but also evoked the dark forces within it. Dr. Gerson was curing patients with cancer, and as a consequence, he testified before the United States Senate on July the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in 1946, along with 5 of his recovered cancer patients and the medical records of 5 more. So stunning was this testimony that on the evening of July the 3rd, 1946, renowned ABC News correspondent Raymond Graham Swing declared on his radio broadcast to the entire United States that for the first time in history there had been discovered a cure for cancer. The public response was overwhelming, staggering, lighting up the switchboards at ABC non-stop, out of control, unbelievable. But what happened next was even more so. 2 weeks later, Raymond Graham Swing was fired from his position at ABC that he had held for over 30 years, and the Pepper-Neely Anti-Cancer Bill of 1946, document number 8947, now gathers dust in the archives of the United States Printing Office.
Behind it all, it wasn't hard to see the hand of Morris Fishbein and the AMA. Fishbein had already been in a long struggle with Gerson, since the German doctor was the first to ever denounce the dangers of smoking, at a time when the largest advertising contributor for the AMA was in fact Philip Morris.
In a repeated national survey, doctors in all branches of medicine, doctors in all parts of the country were asked, "What cigarette do you smoke, doctor?" Once again, the brand named most was Camel. Yes, according to this repeated nationwide survey, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette.
Max Gerson was ostracized from the entire medical community, who labeled him a quack, continuously attacked him and harassed him.
I was investigated 5 times. What do you mean by being investigated, sir? From the AMA. They investigated you? Yes, 5 times. Every time they come, I show them, here the patient you sent home to die, cured. Other patient, you sent home to die, cured. Next patient, you sent home to die, cured. What are you going to do? You don't look like the type of man that's going to give up at this point. No. How could I give up, sir, when I see these wonderful results? That's impossible. First, I write the cancer book. And in that cancer book, I will bring in as many cases as possible sent home to die. So that every physician here in the country can read it. And I will have it translated in many languages.
It took Gerson 10 years to write the book, which presented 50 fully documented terminal cases he had cured with his therapy. Yet Gerson found no major publisher willing to release the book in the United States.
At that point, he was totally and forever banned from publication in the United States.
Why was the American Medical Association so opposed to the Gerson therapy? I think all the medical associations were opposed to the Gerson therapy. Here comes a new approach, a nutritional approach, an effective approach. The medical pharmaceutical industry, if it even wants a cure for cancer, since there's so much profit in this disease, certainly does not want the cure to be a nutritional one.
Dr. Gerson spent the rest of his life secluded in his New York apartment, where he kept curing patients with the same therapy that in the meantime was being forbidden all over the United States.
This is where Dr. Gerson was up until the day of his death, where he had a clinic, where he saw patients, where patients recovered from cancer, where he documented so many recoveries, yet those recoveries are not available to the public. Those published articles have been published in Europe, but have not been allowed to be published in American journals.
Why?
The reason for that is the fact that it's not a patented medicine and it's not an expensive medicine. I mean, this is the crux of the matter. This is a natural therapy that allows people to take control of their own health and not require drug intervention.
If the Gerson therapy were permitted inside the United States, and I believe that it should be, we would see a dramatic decrease in deaths from cancer. I would estimate the fatality rate would go down by at least 50%, very possibly more so.
Exactly like Mildred Nelson, Charlotte Gerson had to go all the way to Mexico to open a clinic to cure people after her father's death. Over the years, the Gerson Clinic has seen a continuous flow of patients from all over the world. The medical records from over 1,500 patients are available to anybody who wishes to examine them.
Further, any physician is heartily invited to come to the Mexican hospital and visit and see a patient there, or visit with the patients, and with their permission, then they would have access to their medical records.
But the medical establishment kept ignoring the call, while officially continuing to deny the validity of the Gerson therapy.
Dr. Dean Adele, whose popular radio and television programs...
A fixture in American television, Dr. Adele has been representing the voice of official medicine on national television for many years.
I don't think the Gerson therapy has ever cured a terminally ill patient. People get very confused by this. If you think of basically what's in Gerson therapy, you really wouldn't expect it to cure cancer. But people, sometimes cancer cures itself. There is a rate of cancer that goes away by itself. Some people didn't really have cancer. It was a misdiagnosis.
In 1986, I was diagnosed with pancreas cancer, which has spread to my liver, gallbladder, and spleen. The doctors told me I had 3 months to live, to go home, get my finances in order, and prepare to die. My husband just wouldn't accept it. I was only 46 at the time, far too young, so we came home, did therapy for 2 years. After 3 months, my doctors here wondered why I was still living. They asked me if I would have a CAT scan, which I did. The masses of cancer had gone. They said, "I don't know what you're doing. We don't want to know what you're doing. Just keep doing it." The doctors at that time said I would never live to see my second grandchild, which he is now 19 years old. So we proved them wrong.
After the therapy, we went back to Utah to a specialist on blood, and she said my blood was so clean and clear that she couldn't tell I'd ever had cancer, and she said I was the first patient that ever happened to.
Yes, and after I had gone back to the oncologist after I had done the Gerson therapy for a couple months, at that time when they had found that I was cured of cancer from the CT scan that they had done on my abdomen, he couldn't believe it. He thought it was a miracle.
For the 10 years following being on the Gerson therapy, which took 1.5 years, I started going back to the Mayo Clinic and seeing Dr. Scott, who was an oncologist there, just for checkups to be sure I was clear. And he said everything was like an 18-year-old again. My blood profile was perfect, and he couldn't believe how I looked and how much energy I had, and he asked me what I'd done, and I went over the Gerson therapy with him. Dr. Scott said, "That's great," but he said that we can't sell that.
Dr. Wallace Sampson is the editor of the Scientific Review on Alternative Medicine and Aberrant Medical Practices, which claims to present an objective viewpoint.
Has Gerson therapy ever cured a cancer patient?
Oh, of course not. They won't even release their records. So,
what would it take for you to be convinced that this therapy is has credibility?
well, first of all, they have to show some reason why it should work. We know how cancers behave, and we know the kinds of things that cause cancer. So they have to come up with some kind of a believable theory of why their diet should work. But second of all, they'd have to convince us that everything we know about it in the past 50 years is wrong, and they're right. Now, how are they going to come up with material like that? That's impossible. They don't have it.
Dr. Gerson documented so many recoveries, yet those recoveries are not available to the public. Those published articles have been published in Europe, but have not been allowed to be published in American journals.